One of the most difficult conversations going on in our world now is the conversation around women's reproductive rights. Maybe you are frustrated by the lack of compassion or the denial of the seemingly obvious personhood of the unborn. I have a special guest that will give us some insight into some of the most popular talking points with the goal of helping us better our conversations around this contentious issue. Hello, doubters. No matter what side of this debate you are on, I think we can agree that there is often more heat than helping. We will talk a lot about the philosophy regarding this issue, the practicality of talking to each other about it, and the compassionate approach that we need to have when searching for truth in this area. My guest is Emily Albrecht. She is a speaker, writer, and video sensation with the Equal Rights Institute, as well as a good friend. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim. I am so excited to be here having this conversation.
Well, I'm excited that you're here as well. So one of the things that is most concerning around the topic of abortion and pro-life and pro-choice and reproductive health is the apparent lack of compassion that is lobbed at both sides, right? I mean, I think we can fully understand
absolutely.
this. Yeah, I mean, one side is accusing the other of just completely lacking compassion for the woman and the terrible situation that they find themselves in. The other side is oftenly like overwhelmed, which is the abortion that is overwhelming for them. And the other side of the situation is often just accused of wanting to enslave women for 9 months to be a baby-making machine. So, Emily, as we start this conversation between you and I today, just go ahead and set the foundation for us as we begin to talk about this.
I loved something you said in your intro. I had not heard your intro before, and just as you were explaining that there is usually more heat than helping in these conversations, that really stuck with me, because I think if we look around in our society, most of what we see is just polarization. We see people that are unable to talk to someone who thinks differently from them, and instead we just end up in these screaming matches. I mean, abortion has always been a difficult topic to talk about. It's emotionally complicated. It's ethically and philosophically complicated. Like, I understand why people have such a hard time talking about that. But if I'm being perfectly honest, these days, it seems like people can't have a conversation about anything. Like, it is quite frankly even depressing to me to just see how polarized our societies become, that we can't have those kinds of conversations. I think that often the problem in really the abortion arena is that people don't understand the other side. Like, I think pro-choice and pro-life people in many ways speak different languages, and they have different priorities or different lenses that they're seeing things through, as you alluded to. And in many ways, it's like the pro-choice person says X and the pro-life person hears Y. Like, they're not even able to comprehend what the other person is saying because of the lens that they're viewing the world through, I guess I'd say. Mm-hmm. And that means that when we don't understand someone on the other side, we have that kind of like first layer problem. But we even have a further problem, which is, I think, our kind of human inclination to other something that we can't understand. And so both pro-life and pro-choice people who first don't understand each other then start to behave like the other side is dumb or bad or the enemy. And that kind of behavior leads to the state of the world that we're in today. The just screaming matches we see on television and on social media and in comment sections. And I think that's what makes this conversation so important to actually have and have well, to really listen to what the other side is saying.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're exactly right. And it's kind of coming at the conversation, not assuming that the other person that you're in dialogue with has nefarious motives and that they're open-minded. So I know the open-mindedness is one of those really important things just for any conversation, particularly in conversations where it can be so emotionally charged and people are miscommunicating. So talk to us a little bit about what open-mindedness means and how we can hopefully approach a conversation being open-minded, no matter what side of the debate that we're on.
That is such an important question, because I think the word open-minded has been misconstrued, I guess, to mean something different than what I think it actually means. Like, if most people hear the word open-minded, they assume that means I'm wishy-washy. about my beliefs.
Mm.
I'm not really confident. I'm going to sway with the tide, and I'm not really sticking to my beliefs, whatever that is, sticking to my morals, sticking to my standards or whatever. And I think that is a really horrible way to think about being open-minded. To me, being open-minded means believing something for good reasons, not just because you're too stubborn to believe something else. Like, if you're truly open-minded, as I believe I am about abortion, I believe I'm open-minded about abortion because I'm not afraid of engaging with what the smartest people on the other side think. Like, if you're not open-minded, you're so scared of being wrong that you're not willing to really investigate, not willing to really listen or try to seek out even those opposite perspectives from yours. I think being open-minded means I'm not afraid to go talk to pro-choice people. I'm not afraid to go read the pro-choice philosophy papers of the smartest pro-choice philosophers in the world and try to understand thoroughly what is it that they think, what arguments are they making? Because if it turns out that I'm wrong, I'm going to change my mind. I'm dedicated to following the truth where it leads. I'm not pro-life because that's what my parents told me to be, or because that's what my church told me to be, or whatever.
Right.
I'm pro-life because I think that's where the best arguments lead. And if I'm actually wrong about that, then I'm going to follow the truth there. I think that being open-minded just means believing things for good reasons, means seeking out the truth and being willing to follow that, and being confident in your beliefs because you did the research.
Right.
What a concept.
Right. Well, and I think for people that are deconstructing their Christian faith, for they're asking those really big questions, I think that's kind of the general stance that they find themselves in, is they're saying, look, I want to be open-minded about whatever questions that I'm struggling with or whatever is leading to my deconstruction. So I'm so glad that you unpacked that for us. And I think, just the areas of, religion that kind of influence the pro-life and pro-choice debate people could really find themselves in the position where they're saying, okay, this is becoming more of a relevant piece. I mean, we're looking at possibly overturning, a 50-year court decision in Roe versus Wade here shortly, as the time that we're recording this. And so that may jog some questions for people to say, okay, what do I really believe about this? And what reasons do I have for the position that I'm holding? And so I hope one of the things that you and I are seeking to do is look at some of those arguments, some of those reasons from the other side. And we're going to start with just kind of reviewing a clip. There's a, kind of right-wing media personality with the Daily Wire named Michael Knowles, who had about a 20-minute or so debate with a medical student. We're going to watch a couple clips and hopefully have you respond as you would, because I'll be honest, even though Michael Knowles is pro-life, as far as I gathered from the debate, I didn't necessarily agree with how he approached this debate and some of the ways that he interacted. So I thought it would be better to have somebody to be able to really unpack what this person is saying and to be able to respond with graciousness and good quality reasons. So let's go ahead and roll this first clip, and then we'll come back and kind of just respond to what she said in this clip. So here we go.
When we talk about abortion, we are talking about ending a non-autonomous life. You do not have the right to bodily autonomy if you are not autonomous. And if you are a fetus prior to the limit of viability, you do not have autonomy. Therefore, you do not have the right to bodily autonomy.
This is a great point.
You reside inside of the body of an autonomous person, and the right to bodily autonomy allows you to refuse to use your body to support the life of another person.
So, again, you could even see just in that small clip, he was kind of, wanting to jump in and interrupt her there. But how would you respond to kind of her underlying argument? Maybe you can just kind of expand a little bit more what she's actually saying, what some of the depth of how she got to her reasoning, and then how would you respond to her?
Certainly. So let me just say that clip is representative of what I see as the biggest catastrophe in the pro-life movement. Pro-life people as a whole don't understand people like that medical student who are making pretty advanced arguments for abortion. Most people understand an argument about bodily autonomy. If a pro-choice person brings up the woman's body, bodily autonomy, most pro-life people's immediate response is, well, the unborn has its own body. The fetus has its own body. And so it's not your body, therefore it's not your choice. If you're pro-life and you're watching this, and you've ever said that phrase, I have too. I said it years ago. I was like, well, it's not your body. Please stop. Because that is quite possibly the least helpful thing you could possibly say. This medical student does a great job of articulating what the actual underlying pro-choice belief is that most pro-life people have not understood, largely because a lot of pro-choice people, I think, don't understand it quite as well as that student does. Maybe they've heard slogans and they'll say things related to bodily autonomy, but they don't even fully understand what they're saying. And if they don't fully understand how to articulate it really well, then the pro-life person who doesn't know to ask a good clarification question here is going to get the wrong idea. And that's how we end up talking past each other. That's how we end up doing this whole pro-choice person says X, pro-life person hears Y thing. Pro-choice person says bodily autonomy, and pro-life person hears, oh, you think the fetus doesn't have its own body. That's not what pro-choice people are saying, and that's certainly not what that particular medical student was saying. What she was saying was the idea that even though the fetus has its own body, even if we assume that it is a person with some sort of rights, that doesn't matter, because you as a person, as a pregnant individual, have the right to essentially refuse the use of your body to another person that is trying to use it. This is a classic pro-choice argument. It actually originated back in the 1980s with a paper by Judith Jarvis Thompson called The Violinist. And it wasn't popular for a really long time. People didn't know about it. And today, The Violinist is being taught in almost every single Philosophy 101 class on college campuses. And so when I go out, a big part of what I do is I go talk about abortion on college campuses with college students. And probably the number one argument that I hear is people talking about The Violinist because they're reading it in their classes. And so I guarantee you that med student read it in maybe a bioethics course or a philosophy course or something like that. And so it might be helpful. Let me just kind of pull back the curtain. What is this violinist thing that I'm talking about, and explain it in its full-fledged version, and then we can dive into some responses.
Okay, so I'm the violinist here because I'm just an amazing violinist. And how do you get brought into this whole charade here?
Yes. So the violinist is this hypothetical scenario. So we're going to role play it out. Tim is a violinist, and I'm the main character of said hypothetical. What happens here is we imagine that Emily, I wake up tomorrow in a hospital bed, and I have no idea how I got there. Like, super scary, right? And I'm looking around, and I see that there is this tube connecting my body to the body of Tim, this world-famous violinist who's lying in this hospital bed next to me.
Right.
And it's obviously a little creepy, right? Like, you got a tube coming out of you going in the body of someone else. I would be concerned if this was me. And so I just wake up, I see this, and at that moment, the doctor comes running into the room and says to me, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Let me explain what's going on. You were kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers. And this man, Tim, in the bed next to you, is a world-famous violinist. And he has this very rare kidney disease. Tim is dying of a rare kidney disease that requires him to be hooked up to someone else's kidney for 9 months. You all see where I'm going with this. So Tim, the violinist, is basically analogous to a fetus. And I am connected to him for 9 months. What happened was super unjust because the Society of Music Lovers somehow figured out that you were a perfect match for Tim. And so they kidnapped you and they brought you here and they connected you to him. And oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But now you're kind of stuck because Tim is a person who has an equal right to life. And if you unplug from Tim, he will die. Obviously, Judith Jarvis Thompson invites us in her paper to agree that I should have the legal right to unplug from Tim, even though he's going to die. And therefore, says Thompson, you should have the legal right to unplug, the right to refuse the use of your body to this fetus that is trying to use it. And that's finally where, like, that exact phrase is what the med student said at the end of her talking point. She said that you should have the ability to refuse the use of your body to other people that are forcibly using you, essentially.
Right.
And that is a much smarter pro-choice argument. It acknowledges the existence of the fetus and even that the fetus has some level of rights, but it uses bodily autonomy as the grounding for why abortion must still be allowed.
Well, I'm First of all, I'm so glad that you decided to acknowledge finally my virtuoso-ness as a violinist, because I've just been
Do you
waiting.
actually play the violin, Tim? Do you?
I played the fifth.
Okay, fair enough.
No, I play the guitar, but
Okay,
but how? I mean, again, this is a really compelling thought experiment that that Judith Thompson has come up with. So maybe give us just a few ways that you would begin to kind of unpack some of that. How would you respond to that? Why isn't that kind of the end all be all? Why isn't the conversation over right here when it comes to abortion and or the violinist?
Yeah, I'll be perfectly honest with you. The first time I heard the violinist, I was a freshman in college, and because I pride myself on being open-minded, I heard it and I said to myself, I got nothing. I might have to become pro-choice now. Like, it's a very compelling argument. And you are correct to point that out. And I want all pro-life people, if you're pro-life and watching this, to just take a minute and process how smart that argument is. I think there's this conception a lot of pro-life people have that pro-choice arguments are dumb. They're not dumb.
Right.
That's a really good argument. So after I've acknowledged that, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it and trying to do my research and figure out how do people respond to this, luckily there are a lot of amazing organizations that are dedicated to taking the time to really think through pro-choice arguments. And my organization, Equal Rights Institute, is one of them. And so I learned from Equal Rights Institute how to think through this well. There's a couple different, as you pointed to, ways that you can think about the violinist, ways to unpack it. And I'm going to focus specifically on two of them right now. The two that I have found to be the most interesting, I guess I'll say, to pro-choice people, the ones that they often want to camp on. If I'm talking to a pro-choice person on a college campus and we go down this rabbit hole of the violinist, these are the places that they tend to get excited and we can have really good conversation. So the first one, pro-life people call the responsibility objection. So this is the idea that when you engage in consensual sex, you are engaging in an action which you know might result in the creation of an inherently needy child. And therefore, you owe that child some sort of compensation. So in the violinist scenario, you did not engage in any action to result in the creation of the inherently needy violinist. Like, you did not put the violinist there. You did not do anything. You just got kidnapped and dropped here. And so your obligation to that violinist is very different from if you had caused that violinist to be there. And I often use a different thought experiment to kind of explain what I mean here. And it's a little bit weird and sci-fi and kind of fun at the same time. Imagine that, like, we had a Coke machine. Like, there's this giant Coke soda machine here, and there's this giant button in the middle. When you push that button, you get a pleasurable experience. And then sometimes a newborn baby pops out of the chute at the bottom. Are you all tracking with me? Okay, we have a like super simplified pregnancy here. You push the button, you get a pleasurable experience. Sometimes a newborn baby pops out of the chute at the bottom. We could even, like, you can imagine it, right? Sometimes, like, we could even imagine that there's multiple buttons on this machine that correspond to different kinds of birth control. And so maybe if you push a different button, you're going to get a different level of a pleasurable experience. And then maybe there's a different % chance that a baby's going to pop out of the chute at the bottom. We can imagine this.
I'm tracking with you.
And so let's say that there is a man who comes up to this baby making machine, this Coke machine, and he really wants that pleasurable experience. But he really does not want a baby to come out of the chute at the bottom. So he picks whichever button corresponds to the level of risk he's willing to take, and essentially he's rolling the dice here. He pushes the button, and he gets his pleasurable experience, and unfortunately, it is not his lucky day, and a newborn baby does pop out of the chute at the bottom. It seems really obvious that he can't just walk away and leave that newborn there to die.
Right.
That's obvious to everyone I've ever talked to. The interesting question is why? Why is that obvious? Why can't he just leave that newborn there to die? And the universal answer is because he pushed the button.
Right.
Like, he engaged in an action willingly that he knew might result in the creation of this inherently needy child. And so it seems obvious that he owes that child some sort of compensation, minimally not to kill them. I think he has to provide that child with food and shelter until someone else can. Like, he could take that newborn out of the chute and go transfer the care to someone else.
Yeah.
I'd be okay with that. I'd be totally fine with that. I think he could choose to parent that child for 18 years, which is a very expensive commitment. He can do that, but I don't think he has to. I think he minimally has to provide that food and shelter until he's able to transfer the care somewhere else.
That's good. That's good.
I think
wow, that's an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, it sheds light on something that we all recognize, that your actions do have effects. I'm not going to use the word consequences. Consequences sounds like it's negative.
Right.
And I'm not punishing anyone for having sex. It's like really not my goal. I do not lie awake at night being worried about all of the people that are having like premarital sex or something. Like, I really don't care.
Right.
I'm not punishing people for making those choices about their life, but your actions do have effects. And I think that if you've created an inherently needy person, you can't kill them when you consented to the action that you knew might result in that.
Right.
I think one of the reasons that a lot of people find that argument really interesting, I guess I'll say, is because even pro-choice philosophers have acknowledged it. Like Michael Tooley, he's one of the most like famous pro-choice philosophers alive. Please look him up. He's a really neat person. I've enjoyed watching some of his things. But he admitted in a debate all out one time that he does not use bodily autonomy arguments at all. Like he has abandoned the whole category of arguments that med student was using because he believes the responsibility objection is that powerful.
Wow.
Because the violinist really isn't analogous to the far majority of cases when pregnancy is occurring.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, again, that your analogy that you've just set up is something new. So I'm really excited that you shared that. And I don't have any pushback because it was new at this point. So is there another objection that you usually use? That was kind of you said there's a couple of them. Is that all, or is there something else that you use?
Oh no, there's plenty more. There's a lot of different ways to think about the violinist. There's 5 main ones that I kind of have in my back pocket. And as I said, that one tends to be really interesting. It's often the first place that I go because I think a lot of pro-choice people relate to it really well. But it does bring up a really obvious objection. If you think about it for more than 10 seconds, which is, okay, it covers 99% of pregnancies, because in 99% of pregnancies, you willingly engaged in an action which you knew might result in the creation of an inherently needy child.
Right.
But what about when it wasn't consensual? Because Judith Jarvis Thompson did something very, very careful. When she created that violinist thought experiment, she deliberately designed it to be as close to the case of rape as possible. Because remember, I was kidnapped in that hypothetical.
Right.
And dropped here. And now I am completely against my will. I did not do anything to cause this to happen. I am stuck. And so it seems like the responsibility objection would successfully say that you shouldn't be allowed to have an abortion. You shouldn't be allowed to kill this inherently needy person you've created for the vast majority, the 99% of consensual sex that results in pregnancy. But that doesn't cover the case of rape. And so we're going to have to go a different direction for that. And that is inevitably, if I bring up the responsibility objection, it is inevitably something the pro-choice person will notice. And I'll usually try to point it out first because I want to make sure that they know I'm not trying to dodge the question of the case of rape. And so it's usually most helpful for me to point that out right away. Be like, I know this doesn't cover that. And like, we can absolutely go talk about that if that's something you want to. And then they feel more comfortable talking to me. They feel like I'm being honest and not trying to like slip something in on them.
Right. And there's no gotchas.
I'm being open. Exactly. Yeah. There's no gotchas in this conversation. Yeah. So let's go camp on that 1% then. Let's talk about kind of the main argument that pro-choice people find the most interesting. And pro-life people call that the obligation to not kill approach. Okay. In other words, I think there is something to be said for having an obligation to help people. I think that sometimes if, like, let's say I was swimming laps at my local pool and I'm a really good swimmer, which I'm not, but let's say hypothetically I was, and I'm like swimming laps at my local pool and I see a toddler come running out of nowhere and fall into the deep end of the pool. There's nobody else around. There's no lifeguard. There's no nothing. It seems like I have an obligation to jump in and try to save that child.
Yeah.
Because I am the only person in the immediate vicinity who is capable of helping an inherently needy child. And
Right.
therefore, it does seem like I have an obligation to. I think that does exist. But I think there's an even greater obligation than an obligation to help other people that I call the obligation to not kill other people.
Okay.
So the way that bodily autonomy arguments usually work is they're always comparing the idea of pregnancy to being required to help another person with your body. So let's take the violinist and make it slightly more realistic. Let's say that, Tim, you were dying of kidney failure. And I was the only person in the whole world who is capable of donating my kidney to you right now. Like, I don't
Okay.
know, we're on a desert island and it's you, me, and the doctor's not the right match. And also he has to be able to perform the surgery. And so I'm the one who has to do it. I have to donate my kidney to you. I don't think that I should be legally required to do that.
Okay.
I think maybe I'm a bad person if I don't.
Okay.
If you're a Christian, maybe I would even say that's a sin if you don't, or like you're really morally bad if you refuse to donate your kidney. But it seems obvious that the government can't force me to donate my kidney to you. And so I have a lot of common ground with the idea that you shouldn't be forced to use your body to donate to other people. Like, I agree with that concept generally.
Right.
But I think in that scenario, I essentially have three options. Like, if you're dying of kidney failure, Tim, I think I can do three things. I think I could help you, which would be me choosing to donate my kidney to you, which would be awesome. Like, you wouldn't die. Yay. All good things.
Cool.
Or I could not help you, which would be me choosing not to donate my kidney to you. You would die. Really sad. Maybe I'm a bad person, but I shouldn't be legally in trouble for that. Or hypothetically, I have a third option.
Okay.
I could kill you. Like, you're already dying. I could just come at you right now with a knife. It would save me a lot of embarrassment from, like, having said no to you. I could just do the job, get her done. We all agree that that should not be a legal option for me, right?
Right.
I cannot legally, hypothetically, I could kill you right now.
Right.
But legally, that should not be an available option for me. Because I think that killing people is always wrong, except in weird cases like self-defense, which we can totally go talk about. But I think most people generally agree that killing people is always wrong, except in weird cases like self-defense, which maybe could apply to something like a just war, or like the concept of self-defense kind of can get spread out to other things potentially.
Sure,
but
definitely.
Killing an innocent person, I can't just kill you right now, Tim. We all agree on that.
Yes.
So if that option, my third option, my killing option, is off the table legally, I think that leaves me with two legal options: help or not help. The problem is that not all three of those options exist in every scenario from the get-go.
Right.
So another weird scenario, this one's way more fun. You don't have to die in this one, Tim. Let's say that you get really rich and you end up buying a yacht, like super awesome, giant boat. You take it out in the middle of the ocean and you're all alone out there when you discover that there is actually a toddler on your boat. Like, this toddler had been playing hide and go seek at the docks with his siblings, and then he had, crawled onto your boat, hid in a closet, and promptly fell asleep, which toddlers totally would do.
I have two kids. They would totally do that.
Yep, exactly. So you're out in the middle of the ocean in your yacht, and you discover there's this toddler. I think in this scenario, you only have two options from the start. I think you can either help that toddler by allowing the toddler to exist on your boat until you take the boat back to shore, at which point I don't think you have to have any further legal obligation to the toddler.
Yeah.
Or you could toss the toddler overboard. Like, you could kill the toddler. There really is no not help option, or like, I just refuse to help. If there was, I feel like that would be the equivalent of us, like, Star Trek beaming the toddler off of your boat and onto shore.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to deal with the toddler anymore. The toddler would be fine. Like, that'd be awesome if we had that technology. I would love Star Trek beam technology. But the problem is it doesn't exist. And so if killing is always wrong, except in weird cases like self-defense, then I think you're obligated to help. But it's not actually because I think you're generally obligated to help people. It's because I think you're generally obligated not to kill innocent people. And that scenario is way more analogous to pregnancy than the whole kidney donation or the violinist. Because in pregnancy, there is no not help option.
Right. Right.
Like, people try to paint abortion as this mere withdrawing of life support, which is not actually what happens in an abortion.
Mm.
In pregnancy, you only have two options. You can either help by carrying that fetus to term for 9 months, after which point I don't think you have to have any further obligation to it.
Right.
Or you can hire a doctor to kill that child.
Right. Right.
There really is no not help option.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Well, and I think that leads into kind of our second clip. So we're going to go back to this conversation with the med student and Michael Knowles, where they kind of set up this willingness and unwillingness. So I think there's going to be some points here that overlap, but I think it's really, again, she makes some important distinctions. Again, the med student in this discussion was really on point. And again, I thought Michael Knowles made some good points. I would invite people to go watch the full conversation, but let's jump into this second clip here from Michael Knowles and this med student here.
Correct. But when you consent to sex, you're not consenting to pregnancy. You are consenting to the possibility of pregnancy. But you can think of it like this. You understand the difference between consensual sex and sexual assault. You should then understand the difference between wanted pregnancy and unwanted pregnancy. Technically, physically, they are the same thing. But when your body is being used against your will and without your consent, those are very different experiences for the person.
But it seems like in this scenario, we've covered it a little bit, but, are there any other, talking points or any other, evidences that you would point to kind of go back to this? I loved the Coke machine example, but is there anything else that you would, divergence or points that you want to draw out here based on what she said?
Absolutely. I think consent is so important. And pro-choice people are rightly pointing out the importance of consent. And oftentimes pro-life people are not responding to that well. In other words, I think that everyone agrees that consent to sex is an important thing. But oftentimes pro-choice people put that at the forefront of their talking points. They're very concerned about sexual assault, and they're very concerned about other cases of people being forced to do things against their will. And that means that pro-life people are often painted as not caring about those things. And the first and most important thing that you need to do as a pro-life person is make sure that you are affirming their concerns about rape, about sexual assault, about all of those things, and acknowledging, breaking down those stereotypes that you do actually deeply care about the victims of sexual assault. And I think that all pro-life people do, they just do a really bad job of expressing it most of the time. And so that's always the first thing that needs to happen. And something I haven't seen the full clip. I don't know how Michael Knowles responded, but I hope that he responded first by affirming the things that she was saying about the importance of consent and the acknowledgement that there are things that the left, so to speak, has done to further conversations about what consent really is, what consent looks like, what consent is not. All of that has been good and beneficial to society. As someone that recently graduated from college and had to sit through many conversations, many training sessions, like as a freshman in college, we had to sit through training sessions about all of these things. And the fact that these spaces have been opened up to have conversation and make sure that everyone is very clear about what is consent and what is not consent, and where to go if you have been a victim of any sort of sexual violence of any sort. Those conversations need to be had more, and I'm glad that they are being had more in many of these spaces. That being said, there is a bad layer. Maybe bad's not a good word. There is another layer to this consent idea. Everyone agrees that consent is really important, but what pro-choice people have tried to do in very recent years, we've seen this in about the last 2 years, is apply the concept of consent to sex down to consenting to pregnancy. In other words, they are making the assertion that you are able to consent to both actions and the effects of said actions, which is simply not true on a philosophical level. Like, when you consent to an action, you are automatically consenting to the effects of those actions. And so if you did consent to sex, you are not then given the opportunity to consent to the things that come out of it. And I'll use another weird analogy. I'm really into analogies, if you haven't figured that out already.
Thought experiments are awesome. I love them.
Experiments are awesome. They help us to isolate variables and think well about things in other contexts so that we're going to be able to think well about it in maybe a more emotionally charged situation. I think they're really helpful tools. So let's talk about gambling. It's a classic example.
You mean I don't get to be a violinist or own a yacht in this one?
No, you don't get to. Well, no, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry, you don't.
Let's talk about the casino gambling one.
Let's talk about casino gambling. This is my most watched video on TikTok. Believe it or not, is the video in which I made this analogy. And it resulted in an insane amount of conversations in the comments about what consent actually is. Like, it was super productive, and I'm so glad it's pinned to the top of my profile. If you follow Equal Rights Institute on TikTok, go watch this one. But basically, this is the idea that, let's say I went to a casino and I decided to play roulette. So if you're not familiar with roulette, it's a game where we like have a bunch of numbers on a wheel, and I bet on where I think basically the ball that's rolling around this wheel is going to land. So let's say I bet on the number 8. I think that that's where the ball is going to land. So I put my chips on 8 to show that I consent to bet on that spin of the wheel. And if it turns out that I'm wrong, I'm going to lose my chips. That's the way the game works. And I'm fully aware of that when I go into the casino and I'm choosing to play the game. I know I consent to place my chips on the number 8. I am free to withdraw my chips at any time before that wheel is spun. Just like how I believe, like, during all the things leading up to sex, all of it, I can withdraw my consent so many times. Absolutely, consent is ongoing during that whole act. But once the wheel has spun, I don't get to withdraw my chips anymore. Like, what if that wheel spun and it landed on 3, and I had bet my chips on 8, right? Now I lose all my chips. I cannot now say to the pit boss, well, hold on. I consented to bet, but I didn't consent to lose. I consented to play the game, but I didn't consent to this outcome of the game. And so now that I've seen the outcome that happened, I want my chips back. I withdraw my consent. You need to give it back to me. Like, I'm going to get thrown out of the casino if I do that.
Right. Yeah.
And we could even take it a step further and say, what if I had a pit boss that was actually sympathetic to me? And he said, okay, I see how that's a little bit unfair. I'll make you a deal. If you're willing to kill one of the other players at the table, I'll give you your chips back. That is a lot more analogous to what's actually happening. Because if you consent to sex, and now we have that unwanted, you probably, in this scenario, obviously unwanted side effect if you are now pregnant, abortion is usually offered as a do-over. It's a backup. We can reverse the clock. You can get all of your chips back if you're willing to kill this other human that is inside of you. And I know you want to talk about some biology stuff about what's going on with the unborn being human a little later on. So we'll get there if you're watching this and you're like, let's go camp on that. But that is much more analogous to what's actually happening. You 100% get to consent to actions. Like, I'm so on board with that. Consent to sex, really important. The problem is that pregnancy is an effect, not an action.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And so again, you're setting us up perfect for kind of our next clip that we're going to talk about. I love the analogy of the casino. That's awesome. And again, you mentioned this earlier, but the right to refuse arguments, kind of the bodily rights arguments, I kind of a little bit assume the personhood, or at least they're at least agnostic to the personhood of the unborn. Like, what are they? You know, are they human? Are they a human person? Do they deserve rights? So the bodily autonomy arguments are, again, the ones that I hear a lot. So it's kind of why we started there. But there is this other, kind of large piece. There's several pieces, but there's this other large kind of conversation that we need to have about what are the unborn? What are they? Are they human? Are they persons? Do they need rights? All this other stuff that kind of goes with that. So I want to move us along to that conversation. Before we get there, before we get to that conversation, we're going to watch some more clips. I do want to mention a few things. You mentioned your TikTok, so I would love to invite anybody that is watching to go, check out your TikTok. If you're on there, I'll leave the link in the description. I would also point you to the Equal Rights Institute's YouTube channel and their website. They have a whole page of links on the bodily rights arguments and kind of how that works. And so I'll leave a link to that in the description as well. And we would love to hear from you. If you're checking this out and you disagree with anything that we're talking about, you disagree with kind of Emily's characterizations of things, please let let us know in the comments. I'm assuming Emily is willing to have another conversation at some point in the future. And I want to say this before we get to the next clip, that Emily, as much as she is amazing and as much as she's just really awesome about, coming up with these analogies and articulating her point, I do have to confess, though, that she is my second favorite pro-life apologist. I'm
honored actually that I made second, because I know who your first is.
And the first really is her boss, and my really good friend Josh, who I've had on the channel before. So I've had these conversations with her boss, where we looked at God is Gray and some of her comments on abortion, and he and I kind of watched some different clips and talked about it as well. So I would invite you, if this is something that you're interested in, to go check out my conversation with Josh. I'll go ahead and leave it in as a card in this video as well. So sorry, Emily, you ranked number 2, but I think you understand why you're
Josh
number 2.
is my favorite pro-life speaker on the planet. I spent years being obsessed with Josh from afar, watching his YouTube videos before I came, and now I'm his colleague, and it's really weird. So Josh is amazing. Love Josh so much.
Love Josh. So we're going to move to this next clip. This is a conservative Christian talk show host, Allie Beth Stuckey, and a progressive Christian named Brandon Robertson. And again, they're having a conversation. I'll say the same thing. It's one of the reasons that motivated me to text Emily and say, can we have a conversation? Because I watched this debate and I was just so frustrated by just kind of the attitude and the talking over that was going on. And you're going to see that in this clip. And so even though I may agree with Allie's conclusions, I disagreed with the way that she was having these conversations and the way that she approached some of these and the way that she responded to Brandon Robertson. So we're going to check out 2 clips from this debate, but we're just going to do one and then we're going to kind of respond. Again, we're going to focus more on the nature of the unborn. What are they? And I think that's going to come out in this clip. So let's go ahead and check out this next clip.
So I think it's important to go with what the science actually says. I've never read any scientific report in all my studies of abortion over the past 8 to 10 years that I've been talking about this topic that says when a baby is conceived, that is a human being.
So pretty bold claim. So he's saying that he has not seen any evidence at all. And again, I don't know what he's read, but 8 to 10 years is a long time. That's long enough to read kind of, if you're interested in this topic, enough that's out there. So know that you've done a lot of this research before. Is Brandon right in his assessment that that's what the biological conclusion is, that what's in the womb before birth is not a human?
No, he's not. Which sounds really, really, really strange to say. I try to always give pro-choice people the benefit of the doubt, try to understand where they're coming from. That one genuinely confuses me. And here's why. There is really a huge scientific consensus about biologically what the embryo, the zygote, the fetus is once fertilization is complete. There are way more interesting things to talk about in the abortion debate. Oftentimes when pro-choice people say a phrase like, no one knows when life begins, or a fetus isn't human, they almost always mean not biology, which sounds strange. So let me back up. If a pro-choice person says one of those phrases to me, let's say that I'm on a college campus, this happens a lot. The first words out of their mouth is, no one knows when life begins. The very first thing that I always do is I ask them a clarification question. I say, I want to understand where you're coming from. And I've heard different people say that and mean kind of different things. So help me understand you. Do you mean that no one knows when biological life begins? Or are you meaning something more kind of, I guess, philosophical? We don't know when a valuable person with rights begins to exist. My team at ERI, we all ask that question. We've asked that question in thousands of conversations about abortion. And I would say less than 5% of people answer the former. Less than 5% of people, when I asked them to clarify what they meant by no one knows when life begins or it isn't human, they were talking about biologically no one knows. Why is that? Because the biology is super clear. Today, in every biology 101 class, they are being taught correctly that biologically, they're all being taught, in their biology 101 classes, that once fertilization is complete, it is a living member of the species Homo sapiens. I use those words very deliberately because I am not trying to sneak in any sort of philosophical claim. I'm not trying to say that that means it should have rights or any sort of value or anything like that. That is the philosophy side, and we can totally go talk about that. But biologically, it is living. It is human, meaning it's a member of the species Homo sapiens, and it is a whole organism. Like, so it's not part of an organism like, say, my skin cell or my sperm cell is. And I'm more than happy I can dive into each of those different kind of scientific claims, but there really is a huge scientific consensus on this. And I have a bunch of sources that I'm more than happy to name drop, throw in the description. I threw a few in like multiple recent ERI posts. And so I can provide those if people want to go do the digging on kind of what the science textbooks say, what the embryology textbooks say, because this really isn't disputed.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really helpful distinction. Again, I would invite people, we don't have to rehash it here, but you guys have and the equal rights argument, which I think is great, and how you articulate that. I've had Josh articulate that on my channel before, so if people are interested, Wonderful. You can check out the video that I did where I kind of invited Josh in. Again, we had a longer conversation with God is Great, but then I did a shorter video that kind of addressed some pro-life issues, and Josh kind of laid out the equal rights argument and that. So we don't necessarily have to go into that. I just wanted to make sure that we are kind of on that we were getting the cutting edge stuff on what's going on. And again, when I heard that, again, I'm like you, I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt, and I wanted him to continue to unpack what he said, but he didn't really give resources again. And Ali kind of pushed him on that a little bit, but they didn't really find a resolution. He wasn't persuaded otherwise. Again, I think that's partly because of how the conversation was approached with Ali. And again, I may agree with her conclusion, but I disagreed with how kind of some of that stuff came across. And he kept saying over and over again, it's a potential human, and he couldn't really clarify exactly what that means. So again, I just wanted to make sure that you kind of helped us set the record straight here.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he meant philosophy. Like, if I had the opportunity to talk to him, if I had been in her position in that conversation, I would have immediately followed up that statement with that clarification question. And I am 99.9% sure, based on the other things you're telling me, if he's talking about it being a potential human, he's talking about value. He's talking about whether or not it's a thing like you or I. It is a person that should have rights. He's not actually talking about biology, but I'll say he didn't do a great job of clarifying that, because he did point blank say, in all of my scientific research, I've not seen this, which to any like person listening to it, you would automatically assume he must be talking about biology then, because he just said, I did scientific research, and scientists don't make value judgments. They're not philosophers. They're not talking about those kinds of things. They're just talking about what is this entity from a biological standpoint. And so he certainly made it sound like he was talking about biology, but based on the rest of the things, and having talked to enough pro-choice people myself, they often say things like that. And then when you really dig down, you find out they really weren't talking about biology. They really were talking about a much smarter thing, a much more intelligent direction for a pro-choice person to go.
Right. Or there was some kind of, forgive the philosophical language, the necessary condition for being alive is that you're independent. So he attached independence with being alive. So like, you're not alive unless you're alive and independent. And again, I don't know a lot of science.
That's like a philosophical definition of alive. That's like you're not having a worthwhile life. You're not out living in the world. Like that's another way of phrasing. The problem is we use the same words. Like we use the word human both to mean philosophical things and to mean literally the biological thing, which is why I always call it is a living member of the species Homo sapiens. That I'm trying to like detach all the value words from it because you're exactly correct that you can use the word alive to mean both a value, like value of your life thing, and a biological term.
Yeah. And again, that would apply for everybody, right? Like, so there's other examples like, tapeworms or viruses, they have to be connected to a host, but we still consider them alive. Like you still have to take medication to kill the virus, even though it's dependent on you. I'm literally dependent on the earth and sustenance and other food. And even though I'm a vegetarian, I'm not necessarily dependent on other animals per se, but I'm still dependent on something in order to continue. Another living thing.
Grass
I mean, like,
living.
lettuce is living. I mean, like in a different sense than a cow or whatnot. But yeah, so again, I tried to unpack. I tried to be as charitable as possible. I wanted to play that clip for you and kind of set the record straight. Yeah. Let's go to this last clip, and then I want to end with just some helpful dialogue tips, kind of given. And we've been doing this, but kind of just wrap it up, given the kind of the current climate that we're in here. So let's go ahead and check out this last clip.
numbers. I want to talk about what is the best way to ensure that women stay healthy, to ensure that our country continues to move forward in a way that protects everyone, including the least vulnerable. And I don't think that is through banning and criminalizing abortion, which is what a number of these Republican states want to do if Roe v. Wade is overturned. And that will, we know statistically that will cause great harm to women, and that will cause great harm to many people across our country, disproportionately affecting communities of color and communities that are already disadvantaged in our society.
Okay, so the big main idea here, and again, I think this is where some of that compassion comes in, is he's saying, look, we want to be compassionate, we want to help people, and I think people on both sides of this conversation generally start with that as a principle. I want to extend that to the people that I disagree with. I would hope that other people would do that as well. I think we've tried to demonstrate that in our conversation here today. But I think his specific claim of banning abortions, he wants to keep abortions available because it's going to protect women. And again, I'm trying to be as charitable as possible, but I'm sure you've had other people kind of mention some of the same things. What are they really saying? Again, what does that mean? And how would you respond to kind of that criticism there?
Sure. So you're absolutely right, first of all, that we have so much common ground as a pro-life movement with what he's saying, with concerns about making sure that women have resources. I mean, if abortion becomes illegal in certain states, if Roe is overturned, there are going to be a lot of low-income women, women of color, etc., who aren't going to have access to get an abortion, and it's going to cause strains on their life in many ways. And the pro-life movement can and must, and I believe is poised to, be providing great amounts of support to those women. And I think that most pro-choice people don't realize, because I think pro-life people have done a pretty poor job of demonstrating that they want to help women, whether that's through they tend to display what I like to call fetus tunnel vision, where they only focus on the fetus. And even though they really do, in their heart of hearts, care about women, and they donate to organizations that help women, and they do all of these things, whenever it comes to actually having the conversation, they get very, very focused on only talking about the fetus. And so it comes across like that's the only thing they care about. And that does a huge disservice to the pro-life movement in many ways by creating this stereotype, by causing pro-choice people to see pro-life people in a certain way, because that's the only thing they're seeing. They're only seeing pro-life people talk about the fetus, and they're not seeing all the support that pro-life people have, and I believe will continue to provide. But that also means that we need to increase that support. There's a lot of things, a lot of concerns that I have about what's going to happen if abortion becomes illegal that need to be addressed. I think none of that means that abortion shouldn't be illegal. I think abortion needs to be illegal. But I think that simultaneously, we need to take a lot of action to make sure that giving birth is affordable, that it doesn't, you're not going to go into debt because of your prenatal and postpartum and actual delivery expenses. I have a lot of concerns just about healthcare. And there's so many things that I advocate for, and you can check out on my TikTok. I've done several TikToks about some of these topics, about what can the pro-life movement be doing and what should they be doing to make sure we're providing that support. So I have so much ground with all of the things that he is saying in that clip. But where we differ is the idea that harm to women should cause us to not ban abortion. And he doesn't really define harm. He uses the word harm pretty broadly there. And so I'll kind of dig in. When I hear pro-choice people say that, they usually mean one of two different things. They either mean that banning abortion doesn't stop abortion at all. And so it's going to harm women in the sense of back alley abortions. They're going to have more dangerous types of abortions. Or they mean that it's going to harm women in more of a financial or their status in society. They aren't going to be equal to men, that kind of a harm. There's two different ways. And I think he may have been kind of alluding to both of them in the way that he phrased that. So we can camp on them each one at a time. I think the more powerful of the two, the one that gets brought up more often, is the idea of back alley abortions. The idea that millions of women, I've heard that claim, millions of women died from abortions before Roe was the law of the land. And so now, if we reverse Roe, that's going to happen again. There are going to be an insane amount of women dying from getting these abortions. So there's multiple things happening here. Number one being is that we do actually know statistically that banning abortion does stop a lot of abortions. And I can have you, Tim, drop some links to sources in the description here so people can go look into those if we want to.
Yep.
But basically what they've been able to do is measure the birth rates in places where abortion restrictions have been put in place. So people will often say to me, well, we can't really measure how many women are not having or are not having abortions when it becomes illegal or heavily restricted because we are not measuring when women have their own in-home back alley abortion. And I'm like, I agree. People can have a secret abortion, but you can't have a secret birth. And
Right.
so what all these researchers have done is measure the birth rate and try to see if an abortion restriction is put in place or a ban is put in place in a particular area, does the birth rate go up? Because hypothetically, if abortions stayed the same, if the same number of people were having abortions regardless of the law, then we would see the birth rate stay the exact same. But that's not the case. We see the birth rate skyrocket in places where abortion becomes much less available. So number one, we do actually know from research done by pro-choice people that abortion restrictions do stop the vast majority of abortions. And secondly, making abortion illegal doesn't suddenly make abortion like more dangerous. And we know that for several reasons. Number one being, if you actually look at the statistics of what happened before Roe versus Wade, there were a lot of deaths from abortions, but they weren't actually because abortion was illegal. It was because we didn't have antibiotics. If you look at actually a chart, and I'll put some sources to that as well. If you look at a chart for the rate of women dying from having abortions before Roe versus Wade, there is a giant drop off, not in 1973. As a matter of fact, in 1973, the amount of women dying from abortions basically did not change. It's like completely stagnant on the graph when abortion became illegal. The drop off happened in the 60s with the advent of and like the ability to widely spread antibiotics. And so, yes, a lot of women did die before Roe versus Wade, but that number had stagnated and remained the same in the few years before Roe happened and the years after Roe happened. Like the actual legalization of abortion really did not change the number of women that are dying. The second part of that is the idea that then abortions today, like let's say abortion was made illegal everywhere tomorrow.
Right.
How would someone get an abortion today? They would get an abortion pill. They would use RU486, which is the abortion pill, which can be shipped across state lines. And so that's kind of the plan in many ways. Pro-abortion doctors, politicians, Planned Parenthood has made it pretty clear. And the FDA has approved abortion pills by mail so that I could, if I wanted to have an abortion in my state, it was illegal, I would be able to get that mailed to me pretty darn easily. The problem is the narrative that millions of women are going to die from abortions if it becomes illegal doesn't align with the same narrative that the same people are putting out about the abortion pill, which is apparently extremely safe. I showed a study on my TikTok video a few days ago talking about how apparently, according to NARAL, only 8 women have died from taking the abortion pill since 1990.
Wow. 8.
So apparently the abortion pill is extremely safe, which I don't agree with. A lot of pro-life people have major concerns about there are actually side effects of taking the abortion pill. Women should not be allowed to take that without a doctor like being with them and prescribing it and being like under their care because things can happen. You can have extensive bleeding, all of these things. But both of those narratives can't be true simultaneously. Either you're telling me that this is so dangerous for Roe to be illegal that millions of women are going to die from having these abortions, or the exact thing that is apparently going to make them die is the safest pill on the planet, even safer than Tylenol. Like, you can't have both of those narratives at the same time. And so it doesn't actually fit the I guess I'll call it the abortion lobby's own talking points about the safety of abortion to argue that making it illegal will stop it. But my last point, or making it illegal will make it more dangerous. But the last point there would be to let's actually take their argument at its face. I've explained why I think it makes no sense to say that banning abortion won't stop at least the vast majority of abortions, and why it makes no sense to say that millions of women are now going to die from illegal abortions. But let's assume that they're correct. Let's assume I'm wrong about all of that. And there will be a fair amount of women who die from trying to have illegal abortions. obviously that is a tragedy. Like, I don't want any woman to be hurt in an abortion, whether it's a legal or an illegal abortion. I mean, I'm against abortion precisely because I think that it's an act of violence against innocent humans. Innocent humans are dying because of this. And therefore, I don't want the same to happen to a woman. I don't want her to be dying either here. And so I have a lot of common ground with that. And inevitably, there will be some women who try to do desperate things. I'm not saying that no one will die trying to get an illegal abortion. I'm sure that there will be people that are desperate enough to do that. The problem is that I don't think we can hold the law hostage because of citizens who are threatening to hurt themselves. In other words, if I'm right about what abortion is, then it is a massive human rights violation.
Yeah.
And I can't think of any other situations in which we would look at a human rights violation and we would say, that is a human rights violation, but we're going to keep it legal just so it is safer for people to keep doing it. Like, if I came up with another analogy, I often talk about the idea of an alternative reality. Like, let's say we lived an alternative version of Earth where the female uterus is so protective of the fetus. Like, I don't know, it's like made of steel or something. It is so protective that it is impossible to have an abortion as we know it. Like, there's no way to just get in there and only affect the fetus because of how protective it is. And so the only way that you'd be able to hurt the fetus in any way would be to do something drastic, like stab your own abdomen with a knife. Like, you'd have to do something inherently very dangerous to the woman in order to accomplish the goal of killing that fetus. And so if we imagine that we live in this world where you can't have an abortion without it being inherently dangerous, let's say that there was a group of pregnant women who were campaigning to make infanticide, or the killing of human infants, legal. Because just like in the US today, infanticide is not legal. But let's say that in this society, it was also not legal. And this group of women were campaigning to make it legal because they were so desperate to not have a child that they were essentially threatening, saying, if you don't let us kill the child after it's born, then I'm willing to do the crazy thing. I am willing to stab my own abdomen with a knife and do something that is inherently dangerous to me. I'm that desperate.
Yeah.
I've never talked to a pro-choice person who genuinely thought that alternative society should make infanticide legal.
Yeah.
Because infanticide is clearly wrong. It's the kind of wrong where innocent people are subject to violence and murder. Yeah. And so, regardless of what your politics are, that's the kind of thing we usually all agree we should have a law against.
Exactly.
And so I think we need to do everything we can to support these women. Like, I want to get them all of the help and support they need so that they don't feel like they're in this desperate situation.
Right.
But I don't think that we should make infanticide legal. We should make a human rights violation legal just because people are trying to hold the law hostage, threatening to hurt themselves because of it. And if I'm right about that, then I think that makes sense why I would say, even if there are a few people who are going to be desperate enough to do something drastic that's going to hurt themselves in pursuit of an abortion, we need to provide them all of the love and help and support and resources and all of the things so that they don't do that.
Right.
But I don't think that can justify keeping a human rights violation like abortion legal.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, man, there are so many other topics, so many other areas that you and I could go down. I would love for in about a minute or so, and again, in a minute or so, only because you have so many other great resources at the Equal Rights Institute YouTube channel and on the blog and via the TikTok, that really, if you just kind of give like a one sentence and say, go check out the blog or go check out the video, you guys have a whole series on quick responses that are just really, really, really great. I think I've shared several of your TikTok videos in conversations that I'm having, and just as a conversation conversation starter. And so I've really appreciated those. So to just give us in like your 1 to 2 minute, what do we need to keep in mind as we're approaching this conversation with other people, or as people are listening to this and they're disagreeing with both of us and they're just really vehemently against our position? How do we have this conversation? What do we need to keep in mind as we go into these kinds of conversations for it to be fruitful?
It is always important to try to understand the motive of the person that you're disagreeing with. And so for years, I grew up pro-life and I didn't really have great reasons for it. But I grew up pro-life, and my perception of pro-choice people was that they were all just ignorant of science, and they were just irresponsible. They didn't want to take responsibility for their actions. None of that is true of the vast majority of pro-choice people. When I actually have done what I have done, I go out on college campuses, I talk to thousands of pro-choice people, I've gotten to know that what's driving their position is almost always a place of compassion. It's a place of compassion for women in difficult circumstances. It's not wanting children to be born into difficult circumstances. And knowing that and getting to really understand what's driving them makes me able to bring my wall down and really listen to what they have to say. And the same is true the other direction. If you're pro-choice and you don't want to talk to pro-life people, you think they're evil, they're bad, they're trying to control women, get to know some pro-life people, talk to people, watch my videos, try to understand what is the motivation underneath the pro-life position. Because it's not what you think. It's not that I want to control people or punish people for having sex or make women second-class citizens or something. It's because I'm really concerned about there being violence against innocent people. And that's what I think abortion is. And maybe you disagree with me about what abortion is. Maybe you think my arguments are all wrong. But if you get to understand at least why I think the way I do, what's happening under the surface, it can enable us to start that conversation and take each other seriously, because we don't assume that we're the enemy. We assume that the other person is genuinely trying to do what's right, and we disagree about what's right. So let's go figure it out. Let's go have that conversation.
Yeah. Excellent points. Emily, I've enjoyed this conversation. I hope the audience has enjoyed this conversation. Again, there will be several links in the description to their YouTube channel, to some of the resources that she mentioned, to some of the articles that she mentioned. Emily, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today, Tim.
Well, I think that conversation, I hope, embodies a lot of the values that I wish our Dealing with Deconstruction community can embody. So when I talk about the Dealing with Deconstruction community, we have a Facebook group that I would love for you to join if you are on the deconstructing journey, if you are asking these big questions, if some of these political debates are causing you to question your faith, if abuse has caused you to question your faith, or just finding out some new information has caused you to question your faith. We'd love for you to join that group. One of the things that Emily mentioned several times is, again, about being open-minded, following the evidence, and understanding somebody else's perspective. And I think that's really important. It's one of the reasons that I've had conversations with John Steingart. It's one of the reasons that I've had atheists on the channel, some lay people and some other atheist personalities, because I enjoy helping understand where they're coming from, how they reach their conclusions, and then engaging with the best arguments out there and the best counter arguments for Christianity. And I hope that helps you as you're deconstructing your faith. So with that, we will see you next time on Dealing with Deconstruction.